Joining again. This is week 3 of our virtual meetup series. Super excited to have another interactive discussion today. Just a few housekeeping notes. We're keeping this as interactive as possible, so feel free to turn on your cameras and microphones. Just keep yourself muted when Frank is speaking here at the beginning. He'll be going into a little bit deeper dive of the discussion, and then we'll have an open Q&A time at the end for attendees. As a reminder, this session is recorded and a link is made available to all attendees on Managecore's website. We'll be sharing that link directly at the conclusion of this presentation, so look for that. Please refer back to any other sessions. They've all been recorded. Share them with colleagues, other partners, or anyone else that you would think would have interest in viewing today's virtual meeting. So now I would like to introduce today's facilitator, Managecore's partner and president, Frank Powell.
Thank you, Kristen. And welcome to those who are joining us today. If you've been looking at our calendar of events, as we've been saying, so Tuesdays we're kind of really focused more on SAP related topics, and Thursdays we're kind of relating to Google and cloud topics. So today, being Tuesday, we're going to talk about the evolution of your SAP landscape and kind of what that means. And there's been a lot of changes. Basically, we kind of take a step back. For those of you who've been doing SAP for any length of time, 10, 15 years ago, or even way back, if you go back to maybe your original implementation, you might have just implemented like SAP 3 dot something or 4 dot something, maybe got the ECC 6, running probably on-prem with a relational database being Oracle or SQL Server, something like that. And although SAP might have been new to your environment at the time, it seemed complicated. It seemed, it was new, it was unique and different. But that was a lot of people's starting point, right? You just ran ECC. And then over the course of time, SAP came out with more products, right? BW was one of the first ones, or their data warehouse product. Then they came out with SCM, which was supply chain, and SRM, which is relationship management, and they had HR, and they had a lot of different products. I mean, at one time, I'm thinking about just like the on-premise products, maybe 7 or 8 different types of products. And the thing about them is back then, they all ran kind of the same way. They were different applications, like the application code. But if you think of the architecture of them, especially if you had a big on-premise environment, they might have been all running on HP gear, running an Oracle database. They all kind of functioned at the administrative level pretty much the same, but the application code inside was a little bit different. Even security was pretty close to the same. And I think SAP customers ran that way for probably, depending upon how much of an early adopter you were, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, you kind of ran in that mode. And then over time, I'll say maybe the last 5 to 7, 8 years, SAP started coming up with more SaaS-based products or cloud-based products, right? So you probably heard things like Ariba, SuccessFactors, things like that, these are these cloud-based apps. So for instance, SCM, supply chain, you might have decommissioned supply chain and went with Ariba as a solution for that. So what we see happening is the on-premise or your core products, some of those people's landscapes are starting to shrink, while customers are now deploying SaaS-based applications for very specific areas of their business or for very specific business needs. So the landscape that we saw 10 or 15 years ago could be very complex in the fact that you had a lot of systems that you were managing. But what made it a little bit easier is they were all kind of the same architectural design, right? So again, all maybe running on Oracle database, all running on Unix, something like that. What we see evolving now is we have people that have more SaaS-based related applications that they're utilizing. And then the actual systems that still remain on-premise, or at least you're using your on-premise license, and I use on-premise synonymous with maybe if it's in a private cloud or a public cloud, but again, the on-premise licensing, and that's when I'm still kind of talking about the SAP applications at this point. That part of the landscape kind of started to shrink a bit, if that's the right word, because today what we see is a very common landscape that's on site for folks is you're still running ECC. Many customers are maybe still running BW. probably PI or PO, maybe XI if you have an older version of it, but some sort of process integration or middleware messaging environment. Maybe BobJ that goes with your BW environment. And that's kind of it. All these other little extraneous SAP applications that they used to run have all gone to the cloud, right? So on one hand, it's gotten a little simpler. On another hand, now my networking has maybe got more complex. How I control that access, where those applications live, who manages them, some of that now makes things a little bit more unique. The other factor that we see that's changing in the landscape is the move from the traditional relational database, again, an Oracle, a SQL Server, maybe DB2, something of that nature, and moving into HANA. Because HANA now is a completely different animal to manage than your typical relational database was. Now, there's some great benefits to running HANA, right? It's a faster database. You get rid of all the indexes, and there's no need for all these aggregates that people used to manage and such. But it is a different database to manage. So what that means is as you need to do performance tuning, as you're trying to size that database, these things are done in a kind of a different mode than they were done under an Oracle database, for example. Because these in-memory databases, if you, again, think of a traditional relational database, to manage that environment, you had your CPU in memory that, because we're running the database platform, and then you had the disk space, which is the size of your database. So if your database grew to be 5 terabytes, you had 5 terabytes of disk. And yes, you needed a little bit more memory, more processing power to make that all work. But that was kind of the balance of that, and the ratios of CPU to memory and things like that were kind of based on more of a function of how many users you had and the kind of applications you ran. When you look at now looking at a HANA database, all of that data is sitting in memory. But the systems also need that memory to process the actual database engine. So when people think of buying, oh, I have a 1 terabyte HANA appliance as an example, that 1 terabyte not only needs to store the application data because it's all in memory, but you also need to keep a little bit of that memory available just to run the operating system and the database engine itself. So a rule of thumb in that case, for example, is when you run HANA and you have a 1 terabyte appliance, you need to leave about 20% free for the database and the operating system to function, and then the rest can be data. It's more like 50% when you get to BW environments. So just a quick example of managing and tuning those systems is different. The other thing that's unique about HANA too is, they've really created a database engine that's also a development platform. So you can do a lot of your code development inside the database, in addition to still doing it in ABAP or other languages that SAP supports. But because you can do it there, it creates operational challenges, but it also then creates security challenges. And that's just if you're writing code. Particularly for BW systems, it depends on what tool you're actually accessing the HANA database for from a reporting standpoint. So if you're using BobJ, that security access is pretty native to SAP, but there's a lot of third-party tools like Tableau, for example, that can also access that database engine directly, which is also now unique that SAP supports that. If you remember, back in the day when you were supporting an Oracle database, SAP used to always say you never access the database directly with a third-party tool. You always go through an SAP interface. Well, with HANA and certainly reporting, they've kind of changed their tune on that. So now you can use third-party reporting tools to access that HANA database, but now you have the ability to do the access controls and the security of the data inside of the HANA database. So you no longer go through an SAP engine like BW. You still can. Don't want to make it sound like you can't. You still can do that. And I'd say still a vast majority of people do. But if you want to use a third-party reporting tool, you can hit the database directly, but then you need to set up security for that. So how does this change things? Well, now I have a security mechanism inside of my database that in traditional, older SAP environments, you never had to deal with. So now you do need to understand what that security looks like and how do you manage that. We've actually worked with customers that have had 4 or 5 or 6 different reporting tools because each department or business unit used a different tool for some of their internal applications. And then when they wanted to hit the global SAP footprint, trying to get those all to work together because the way they access and the way they look at data are all a little bit unique. So that creates different challenges just from a security standpoint, right? And then if we just look more at just the landscape, and again, I mentioned a common landscape is today, BW, BobJ, PI, and generally ECC, or now S4, we're seeing more of that. The architecture of that platform alone now changes a little bit. And certainly when you think about PI, which is the communication channel to outside data sources, if I say that at a very high level, right? If you're trying to interface SAP data with another third-party product or to a third-party partner or vendor, more often than not, customers are running that through a PI or PO or XI interface that can do some of the data normalization as it comes in and out of your system, right? And those systems are becoming more and more critical to productive operations. Clearly, if you're taking orders through that PI system or vendors are accessing data from your system through that, it becomes very important. So taking a step back and looking at it from that view, now the architecture in which we're supporting those platforms on is also changing. Because now when you talk about high availability, I want to create an HA environment, maybe not just for my ECC or my S4 environment, but now I also need to create a high availability solution for PI, right? Now we don't see people doing that for BW because it's a reporting system. So usually high availability isn't a requirement there. But how do I create this high available environment for every piece of my operating application? Because if any piece of it goes down, if I can't take orders, can't ship orders, can't get vendor information, things like that, that's obviously critical to business operations. So the way you architect it is very important. Very closely related to that is now we see a lot of people choosing to move to the cloud. And if you're in a private cloud today, private clouds are very similar to running like on-prem. At least most private cloud vendors have architected their solutions to that. So I won't talk too much about that, but I do want to talk about going to the public cloud. Because if you move your SAP landscape, as the landscape we just talked about the last few minutes, how it's changing, and now you move that changing environment into the public cloud, now qualified public clouds being AWS, Amazon, or AWS is Amazon, sorry, Azure or Google, those three are kind of the main three. What does that mean? Again, I think there's huge benefits to customers, especially SAP customers, to run their SAP landscapes in the public cloud. But again, the public cloud is a little bit unique, right? It's really infrastructure as a service. And the way I describe the public cloud to most people is a set of building blocks, right? There's CPU, there's memory, there's disk, there's networks, there's firewalls, there's all these building blocks in the public cloud. And you still have to know how to architect that correctly from a sizing standpoint, from a security standpoint, from a networking standpoint to make sure network speed and access is adequate. But it's a different skill set likely than traditional on-premise used to be. Because no more are people sizing hardware and it shows up on your dock someday and you have to unbox it and uncrate it and put it in the rack. You're saving all of that time by going to the cloud. So there's no need to do that. And you're not doing everything just by plugging the wires and going to the operating system level and configuring the SAN and things like that. You don't have to do those low-level tasks when you go into the public cloud. But now we have a set of, I'll call them administrative user interfaces. So each one of those public clouds has an admin console that you log into, and you pick the size VM you want. You assign disks to that. You assign the network addresses, whether they are public or private. You configure your firewall. They all have ways to then do security around those objects. And each of the vendors do it a little bit differently. But again, it's a different skill set. So you probably have heard the term like cloud architect. Now, cloud architects many times go beyond just infrastructure, right? Cloud architects do work in things like big data, machine learning, and they know how to put all those building blocks of not only infrastructure together, but actually cloud-based applications or cloud-based services today. For instance, Google has BigQuery and other applications that would help you in other types of business needs outside of pure ERP, and cloud architects can do that. But this notion of building the architecture and the landscape inside of a cloud is unique to SAP and how you build that out as you're thinking of migrating, right? So you have to put all these pieces of the puzzle together. And like I said, I think we're seeing these ERP and SAP environments, what they looked like 10, 15 years ago. Think of what they were then, and now potentially being in the public cloud, running on HANA, running on S4, kind of a reduced size of your landscape, but now integrating into other third-party SaaS products, again, like Ariba, SuccessFactors, Concur. But in addition, most companies have a multi-cloud strategy, right? So all of your items or all of your applications may not be just in Google and GCP, right? You may be taking advantage of an application that's in Azure, or maybe you're authenticating through an Azure AD, but you also have some things in AWS. So this multi-cloud strategy, again, creates I'll call it another layer of complexity. Not necessarily hard, but it's just different. And what we find is customers, as they try to make this move, it is a bit daunting because you're talking about multiple vendors, new technologies, new skill sets, and it takes a while to absorb and kind of build out what that framework and what those policies and processes that your organization needs and the way you are going to adapt to these like changing technologies, right? So we're seeing this kind of a transformation that's happening over the last several years, and I think we'll see this continue probably the next 5, maybe even 10 years, right? I think since SAP has kind of announced that this HANA requirement that used to be 2025 is now 2027, that's given everybody a little bit of breathing room. So when we talk to customers these days and they talk about a cloud strategy and what are they going to do, I'd like to take a step back sometimes and I ask, what's your SAP strategy and what's your landscape strategy? Where do you see the applications you have today? Where do you see them living in the next 4 or 5 or even 10 years? And by that, I'm not asking, are you going to put them in the public cloud or not? I'm asking things like, if you're running SAP's SCM product, are you going to decommission that and go to, Ariba? If you're still running an old, SAP HR system, are you going to go to SuccessFactors? Or maybe you're running BW and you're thinking of leveraging Google's analytics engines and you're going to migrate that up there and get off of BW. You need to kind of think about what that strategy is from an application standpoint, because that will actually help you and assist in mapping out what that architecture looks like, which clouds are most appropriate to move those workloads to, which workloads you still may even be responsible for, right? There's all sorts of options through this evolution of SAP new products, as well as the cloud and where that's taking us, right? So again, just quick topic today. Just wanted to kind of review that and just give people some things to think about and what we're seeing in the industry as far as trends, because it is interesting. We throw this out there all the time. I still have customers we support that are running 4.6c on Oracle, right? They've kind of given up support. They're usually smaller customers that are just keeping the lights on. But all the way to customers that are running everything on S4 in the cloud on HANA, and as you can imagine, everything in between. But everyone's journey is a little bit different. And as you start to embark on that journey yourselves, if you have questions or just want some advice or some guidance, Managecore is always happy to answer some questions and to help you through that process. So with that, I guess I can open it up back to you, Kristen, and see if there's any questions today.
Sounds good. Does anyone have any questions that are live on the phone?
Hey, Kristen, this is Carl. Frank, maybe you can touch on, some of our experiences over the past 20, almost 30 years. Cough, cough, wink, wink. What separates us, Managecore, both technically and using our years of experience when we support our customers?
Well, I guess just it is about the experience, right? I mean, Managecore has kind of gone to kind of just hiring senior level folks that know this. I think more importantly, though, what we've learned in this process is in 10 or 15 years ago, people really segregated duties, and for large organizations, it's hard to avoid this. But what I mean by that is you had the basis team, maybe you had a set of DBAs who did the database administration, then you had operating system folks who just did infrastructure and operating systems. With this move to the cloud specifically, we've really cross-trained our teams. So our basis administrators know how to configure the clouds so they can actually do some of that implementation and spin up servers and test DR, and if they need to add disk, they can do those. So what we're seeing though, and on a whole, is this evolution, as much as anything, makes the organizations far more nimble than they were 15 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. I mean, we see implementations of SAP and migrations to the cloud, or upgrades going really fast. I mean, where things would take months and months 10 years ago, today we can spin things up in minutes in many cases, right? So think just as an example, think of 10 years ago, you were going to go from, say SAP 4.6 and you were going to go upgrade to ECC 6. That meant you had months of planning. You probably had to order new hardware. It had to get stood up on the floor. You'd hopefully get the first box ready for a sandbox. People would start doing their blueprinting, and all that took time, right? We have customers today that are on ECC that are wanting to go to S4. We'll spin up a box in a day, start the migration, and in a couple of weeks have the first server done, ready for blueprinting or ready for remediation of seeing what happened as part of that process, and go through the landscape rather quickly. Because not only I'm talking about infrastructure, but now there are a lot of third-party tools that help do the remediation of an upgrade to S4, right? So I think the tools that are available, the skill sets that are there, I mean, and Managecore has seen a lot of that, right? So what we try to do is help people get from point A to point B thoroughly, because that still is the end of the day. You have to do it thoroughly, but we can get there very quickly just with the tools, the infrastructure, and the knowledge that we've gained, over the last many years of doing this type of work, because we are embracing a lot of this new tool set. I think that's one of the things I think some customers struggle with. How do you embrace all this, right? Because again, it can be daunting. And if you wanted to go to the cloud, well, if you want to do it all internally on your own, who do I send to training, and how long is it going to take, and how long do I retain that person? So there's all these challenges as technology changes, obviously, but those are the kind of things we can help customers with, right? We can give them that experience or give them our experiences of how we've seen many other customers get there and see which fits. Because again, it's not a one size fits all, but just a few,
absolutely,
few points on that.
Well, that actually kind of flows into the next question of what would you suggest should be the evaluation criteria for picking a managed service provider? I know Google is our preferred cloud platform, so any suggestions there for SAP customers looking to make a change or help?
Well, so that was about managed service providers though, not the cloud? Is that right?
A little bit of both. Just talking about managed services on Google Cloud.
Yep. So managed services first. To me, any type of consulting, I've always come down to, it's always about the people, right? It's you can get a great sales pitch from a great sales team, but at the end of the day, it's who ends up managing your account and working with you day to day that's really going to matter and have the experience, or what your experience is going to be like. So when you're picking a managed service provider, I would just say always ask to at least see the resumes, or if not, talk to the people that will be supporting your environment long term, because that's really what it's going to matter from that point. On the cloud side of it, there's some pros and cons of each one. I mean, I think we are I guess a very strong Google partner for a reason, and it's mostly based around technology. I mean, we do support customers in each cloud, right? So we have customers that are in Azure and AWS as well. But our technical teams would tell you that it's just easier to manage SAP workloads in GCP. Just the tools they use, the way the flexibility of utilizing their resources, some of the features like live migration and their direct integration to backend for backups, their use of multi-regional cloud storage, so I can write a backup into multi-regional cloud storage and restore it to any other region in the country for DR. Some of those things are just inherently part of Google's solution. Even things like, once you get into the Google Cloud, your data is encrypted across their network and at rest. So, not that you can't do some of those things or have those same functionality in other clouds, but it's just native in GCP, where others it has to be configured. So there's all sorts of caveats to that. The other thing we see about Google is people are interested in putting SAP there because at the end of the day, they're really interested in using their AI or machine learning or big data like applications and solutions. So getting your SAP footprint there makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of synergy if you did it that way. But
Sure.
Again, we have people being successful in all the clouds, and it could certainly help customers navigate what might be the right solution for them.
That sounds good. I think that's all the questions I had on this side. We can briefly just talk about next week if you want to go to the next slide.
Sure.
Or, I'm sorry, on Thursday's session, excuse me. We will be talking about Live Migrate Compute Engine. That session will be led by Nick Militich, Senior Solution Architect. So he'll be going into a little bit more of a technical discussion regarding that. Recorded sessions, again, are always available on Managecore.com. I have them up pretty quickly post-meeting. You can go to that link. Otherwise, just visit our homepage, and it's right there for you. Any questions, again, please always feel free to reach out to the Managecore team, myself, Michael Hazy, Carl, Frank. We're all here to help. Again, hopefully these virtual meetups are a place where we can have open discussions, and we're really answering, the technical and business questions that a lot of SAP customers have. So we really appreciate everyone joining today. Thanks,
Great.
Frank.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day. Bye now.